Welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched, our spoiler-heavy look at the movie and TV adaptations of the mystery genre's greatest writer. I'm Bill Peschel of Peschel Press, publishers of the annotated novels of Agatha Christie, and today we're talking about abusive fathers, cross-dressing lawyers, unauthorized fiction, and designing golf courses. It's Agatha and the Truth of Murder, the 2018 movie that gives us an alternative history of Christie's 11-day disappearance. But before we get into that, let me introduce my partner in marriage as well as crime of the fictional kind, Teresa Peschel. Hello, Teresa.
Hi! It's always a pleasure to be here with you in your little office under the stairs. It's not really a garret because you're below grade, but there are no windows and it's a little sealed room, but it does make for good podcasting spaces, and that's why we're not installing a window. No matter how much you want to look at 6 inches of ground, because there wouldn't be a lot of space.
That's
but
right.
You would have a tiny window. It would be like in a dungeon.
It would
You'd
be
have
a dungeon.
Yes,
it would
you'd
be just
have
like the rest of the main room, that we have that half circle of metal and the small window, so all you can do is see the light.
You can see the sun coming through and think, oh, so close and yet so far.
The Man in the Iron Mask or the Count of Monte Cristo. That's more likely. We've gone through a lot of the Agatha Christie adaptations, and we're going to be moving to the overseas versions. Plus, in the future, we're going to go back and rewatch some episodes from the beginning of the project. So if you be patient, we're going to get back to Miss Marple episodes and other episodes as well. Today, we're going to be indulging in the movie Agatha and the Truth of Murder, which is an unusual series of movies. There's 3 movies that we'll be watching and commenting on. This one was written by Tom Dalton and apparently appeared on BBC 5, I believe, Channel 5 over there, which is not the main BBC channel, but one of the other entertainment channels.
Oh, this is the low-rent cable division for you Americans. Straight to video, folks.
We were going to only just watch one of them, but it turned out to be a lot better than we anticipated.
It was so much better than I was expecting. I was expecting to suffer through this movie, particularly because it all took place during Agatha's 11-day disappearance. As part of the project, we've watched the documentaries, which gloss over it. We watched the Doctor Who episode, which was really fun, loaded with Agatha Christie references, and probably gave a much truer picture of Agatha Christie as a person. And it did involve giant space wasps, and yet it was far more respectful towards her than the Vanessa Redgrave, Dustin Hoffman hatchet job called Agatha, and that was truly dreadful. And I have to say, if you're going to make something up about what Agatha did during her 11-day disappearance, turning herself into an electrical engineer so that she could kill herself and put the blame on Nancy Neal, and Archie would be sad when Agatha was dead and Nancy was hung by the crown for killing Agatha. This was so much better. This was so much more reasonable. This was so much more rational. Agatha is asked by someone, please, please, please solve the mystery of the murder of my dearest friend and lover. And she goes off for a couple of days to this mansion out there in the woods and solves the murder. And you know what? This made 100% more sense than that awful Vanessa Redgrave biopic, which was truly terrible. And by the way, both of these movies, both Vanessa Redgrave and this one, are disavowed by the Christie estate because there's a statement in the credits that says this has nothing to do with that. This is worth your time. That one isn't.
I think given the fact that it's the grandson and great-grandson of Christie, at this point, they're kind of looking at this saying, well,
what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? So it wasn't
and it's
as
not
bad
like
as
that French horror
Innocent
either.
Lies.
Oh,
Yes, that one
oh my
raised
God,
their
that was
hackles.
horrible. That was absolutely horrible. That one, Rosalind just about had kittens when she found out what they were going to do with Towards Zero, which has still never been filmed, as far as I know. Certainly not in English. It has never been filmed, because the Miss Marple version isn't exactly the text. But that one, too, has a statement that says, disavowed by the Christie estate, and by God, you want to avoid that. But this was fun.
Yeah. To be accurate, it said, the film has not been endorsed, licensed, or authorized by the estate of Agatha Christie or by Agatha Christie Limited, which is pretty much a statement of fact, and it's not a matter of opinion. like you said, this was actually far better than we expected it to be if you take it in the right spirit. And by that I mean you don't think of this as being any way reflective of Agatha Christie reality.
This is Agatha Christie as a character. And in fact, there is another famous name that shows up in the opening scenes, Arthur Conan Doyle.
It opens with Agatha. This is at the time when she is on the outs with Archie. He has already asked her for a divorce.
They have a great actor playing Archie. You can see, good-looking, hot, sexy lunk who has absolutely no consideration for anyone else. But when you're young and in love, you don't think about that, and so you marry him in haste and then repent at leisure.
So you get this scene on the golf course with Agatha and Conan Doyle, and Conan Doyle is being sought for advice. Agatha is not able to write.
She is so upset. They don't mention her mother dying, but Archie has already said, I want to marry my 24-year-old hot cookie. He doesn't use exactly that phrase, but he wants to marry his 24-year-old secretary that he's been banging, and she
doesn't want to.
And she doesn't want the divorce. She is distraught.
Yeah.
And they don't mention her mother's death, but, her life is falling apart around her ears, and I can see why it would be hard for her to write. And she is the main source of income. Up until this point, after the disappearance, Agatha wasn't able to tell herself anymore that she was a housewife who wrote. But she made a lot of the money, and she was the reason people knew the Christie name. It wasn't him.
When she's approaching Conan Doyle about writing, it is in a way not what you might call accurate. Because here's the thing. She's asking for advice because her books apparently, she thinks they're formulaic. The mysteries that she sets up, that it's always the obvious person. And therefore, readers are saying, we figured this out early, which is not true.
Yeah, that is definitely not true.
She's always used misdirection. That's a basic mystery trope. Sometimes the person you most think of as being the one who done it didn't do it. And she was an absolute genius in doing this. So first of all, you have this kind of false premise set up.
But it's also, if you are a writer and you're trying to explain to relatives how you write, it's actually a very interesting conversation about getting outside of yourself and focusing on something else, refilling the bucket, refilling your emotional wherewithal so that you can sit down and write again, so that you can make up people and put them through their paces and have things happen to them and have it be coherent and make sense and write it all down. How do you rejuvenate yourself so you can do this?
Right. So they meet on the golf course. Conan Doyle says, you should play a hole with me first. And she says, I hate golf, which she does. She played golf for Archie's behalf. In fact, she introduced him to the game, much to her later regret. But she knows how to swing a club. So all that part is actually accurate.
I don't know about Archie consummating his relationship with Nancy Neal on a golf course.
Golf course. That's true, too.
Is that true?
I don't know. I don't think
have
so.
any idea if that's true. And my first thought was, what, in a sand trap?
Oh, Lord.
Up against a tree in the rough? That doesn't make any sense unless you bring a blanket with you.
Leaving your fantasies aside, they go ahead.
Hey, I write romance. I have to think about these things.
That's true. That's true. Even Anakin Skywalker said sand. He doesn't like sand. It gets into everything.
That's why you don't choose the sand trap.
So Conan Doyle talks to Agatha. She relates to her problems. I'll just wait for a moment here until you're done.
Sorry, folks. Sometimes I start to laugh and I just can't stop. It's because Bill is a really very funny guy and he always makes me laugh. Anyway.
Not that you'll see evidence of it here, but just take her word for it, folks. But anyway, Conan Doyle offers simple advice for her, and it is loopy advice, but it actually, I could see how it could work. He tells her to design a golf course, and she is absolutely stunned, of course. What do you mean design a golf course?
Because what does this have to do with writing or with anything? But in a way, he's not wrong, because designing a golf course is completely different, and you have to think about a completely different set of things. You have to think about the lay of the land. You have to think about sand traps. You think of think about properly shielded sand traps with nice rows of trees to give a little privacy to people who are using the sand trap. The rough, the pools of water. I mean, whatever it is that you have on a golf course, because you have to do things with it.
Yeah, it becomes a puzzle, and it's like a three-dimensional spatial puzzle, because she's actually sitting there.
Oh, it is.
She has this wonderful.
Oh, but she does this after this. She does this
Yeah.
after she goes to talk to the golf course designer,
Which was an amusing scene in and of itself.
Oh my God! And he is just disparaging the golf course designer.
Who's a knight, by the way.
Yes, Sir Hugh Persimmon.
What a great name!
It is a great name, Persimmon. Anyway, he's he at first thinks that Agatha is there because he knows who she is, of course, because she is a famous mystery writer, and he thinks that she's there because she wants to set a murder on a golf course, which of course she had already done with Murder on the Links, although the body was found
in a sand trap. And that was about the extent of the links.
Yeah, they didn't really
connection.
spend much time on the golf course, except that the body was in the sand trap.
Well, it was actually in a place that was going to be a sand trap. It had already been marked out and was going to be used for a sand trap. So,
but yes, she did have a murder on a golf course, and there were, based on our research on the complete annotated Murder on the Links, you found that there were a lot of novels at the time, a lot of mystery novels set on golf courses, which came as a total surprise to me. I had no idea until I was reading over your research and editing it. So it wouldn't actually be nutty for Sir Hugh to think that, both because he knows that Agatha Christie is a famous mystery writer and other novels have been set on golf courses, quite a few as it turned out.
He dismisses her intelligence, dismisses her concerns.
Because no woman could design a golf course. It's simply too complicated. And he's telling this to a woman who has plotted 6 novels by this time. Carefully plotted, complicated novels, and written innumerable short stories, and he tells her to her face, you only have 2/3 of the brain of a man, so you can't do this. And she tells him off in the most polite, ladylike, and it could be interpreted as incredibly risque, if you like,
Because what she says, I even wrote this down. How could I have been so stupid? Imagine a woman being able to design the preamble to putting something small in a hole. A woman might just present the hole and have done. And where would be the fun in that? There'd be nothing to groom for a start.
And you can read that any way you want, folks. But I thought it was very well done. The actress did a beautiful job. It was funny, and it
put him in his place, that's for sure.
It put Sir Hugh in his place.
He couldn't pinpoint anything objectionable about anything she said.
Because she was agreeing with him wholeheartedly. And at the same time, you think of all of those women who laid back and thought of England and said, just get it over with. And
And this is an example of the really smart writing in this show. It was really very well written. So she goes back to her home and figures it out for herself.
And she lays out a golf course all by herself. She lays out a beautiful golf course, this huge model with rolling hills, wilderness areas, and the aforementioned sand traps and ponds and so forth. Rosalind comes in. I thought Rosalind was actually handled very well, because it was clear that Rosalind and Agatha didn't have a touchy-feely, mommy-daughter relationship of the kind that you would normally see in a Hallmark movie. And if I remember correctly from Agatha's grand tour, when she came back, Rosalind was a little diffident, but then Rosalind had been left back at home for almost a year.
Yeah,
well,
Rosalind
Archie and Agatha went off and had fun.
Right. Rosalind is Agatha's daughter, and she was somewhere... Well, here she was a little older, because
she looked like she was 7 or 8.
7 or 8. So she, clearly talked, clearly knew mommy and daddy. And yeah, back in the grand tour, when she was like 3 years old, I think, and she was left with her grandmother for 8 months. So that changes the dynamics.
Yeah, it changed the dynamics of the relationship, and you could see a little bit of standoffishness. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, again, was accurate. That was accurate to the actual relationship. They were close, but not in that touchy-feely way that you get in sappy movies. It was not like that.
And not as close as Agatha's relationship to her mother, in which they were very, very closely tied to each other. So when her mother died, she
was absolutely devastated. But yes, so Agatha is looking over the beautiful golf course. She's commenting on it with Rosalind. And a little bit later on, Archie comes in and he looks at the golf course and he instantly assumes, "You designed this for me?" Well, no. And maybe we should have some kind of a truce. Remember, this is after he has said, "I want a divorce so I can continue banging my secretary."
Yes, and now he comes in and says, "Can we have a truce, at least a truce in the argument?" And yeah, he was in love with the golf course because he was an avid golfer, but he only saw it through himself.
Oh my God, the attitude. I can't think of the word that I'm looking for, maybe the narcissism, as Archie is looking at this beautiful golf course that Agatha has built, this immense scale model that covers 2 dining room tables from the looks of it. And, "Oh, you did this for me?" As though nothing else exists in the world but what he wants.
Didn't ask first, "Why did you do this?"
Yeah, he didn't ask. He just assumed.
And suggested, "Why don't we stay in and we can go over the golf course? I can see how you can improve it." And she was about to do that, and then she thought, "No, why bother?" Which again, the old Agatha probably would have said yes, because she was still desperate to have Archie around. But of course, then you wouldn't have the right dynamic for this scene. And this is where fictional life sometimes eclipses real life.
And I read that particular scene as Agatha looking at Archie saying, "Oh, you did this for me? And by the way, I have improvements. And yes, let's sign it. Let's declare a truce, even though I still plan on divorcing you so I can bang my secretary." You can see this thought, "Why am I here again with you? You don't even see me. I see you, but you don't see me as a person." This particular scene was painful. You can see the realization in her eyes that he is not going to come back to her. And he never saw her anyway. I mean, his first statement out of his mouth, and we all say stupid things, when we open our mouths without engaging the brain first. But his first statement, "Oh, you did this for me? To get me back?" I mean, he didn't say that part, but you did this for me? And it never even crossed his mind that she might have had a different reason for doing this, something related to the fact that she was having terrible trouble writing.
It speaks to the dynamics of their relationship, because in the end she says, "I have to get back to work." And of course he fumes and leaves in a huff. I can also see that as being reflective of their marriage as well, because when you realize that she was writing a novel a year plus 10 to 12 short stories.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of time.
And mystery novels, no matter what people say, I've read a lot of Agatha Christie now, and she really doesn't write a formula, or she plays with formula. She plays with tropes. She rewrites things. She turns things inside out. And that demands thought. None of her books could be construed as cookie cutter. None of her short stories. And you could see the progression that she got better with her short stories, but it takes time. It takes time away from Archie.
Time away from Rosalind as well.
Yes, time away from everyone around her. And this becomes one of the hard things for any person, man or woman. If you're going to be working all the time, when are you going to make time for the people you claim you love? And it's really hard. How do you balance that? You only get 24 hours a day. And she was making money writing, and they needed that money. Her money is what made the difference between living in a flat and living in a nice house. He didn't buy styles. She did. She
gets involved in the mystery, in the murder case.
A nurse,
Florence Nightingale Shore, who is goddaughter to Florence Nightingale, the nurse, which is why she took the name. And so you have to understand that at the beginning, because she keeps talking about Florence and being a nurse and all that.
Yeah, it's not the Florence.
Florences in the case.
Yeah, and the real Florence Nightingale doesn't get mentioned other than she was the godmother of this Florence. But anyway, Mabel Rogers, nurse, shows up at exactly the opportune moment in the script, desperate for help, and Agatha is not interested in helping this crazy woman solve the bludgeoning death of her dearest friend in the world 6 years before. She is not interested in solving the mystery of the murder on the train. And there are, by the way, a lot of Agatha Christie references tucked into corners. Agatha is completely disinterested because, as she says, I write mysteries. I am not a detective. I am not a policewoman. Why are you coming to me? Well, because you're my only hope. And then after another blow up with Archie, she picks up the folder, which Nurse Rogers insisted on leaving behind, and starts leafing through it. And one of the first things that leaps out is the man in the brown suit as a newspaper headline, murder on a train. And I'm sure that this is just like the Unicorn and the Wasp Doctor Who episode. This film is just loaded with little references that you probably won't even notice.
Well, there is, but there's not as many. There's not as many. Unicorn and the Wasp, they made a dedicated effort to cram as much as they could in an hour. The ones I picked up, and you picked up as well, because you saw Agatha was using the name Westmacott for her alias when she's investigating it, and that, of course, is her nom de plume for her personal novels, Mary Westmacott.
That's right.
Miller is also Agatha Christie's middle name, which was given to Wade and Daphne Miller, the abusive father and the daughter.
Well, there's the whole idea of gathering everybody in the country house that you see in the climax, where everybody is cooperating to make sure that the accused who had gotten away with it are punished for their crimes, even if not necessarily the same one.
So what happens is that Agatha decides to investigate the case, and she sets up this elaborate ruse with the help of Mabel Rogers to lure the suspects to a country house, with the pretense of they're all connected by this. She makes up this false story. She's acting as a lawyer's representative, and she's wearing this very butch, man's suit, and her hair pulled back, much like lesbians did in those days.
But I have to say, I know where you're going with this, but I have to say that women in business wore suits. They wore severe tailored suits because it made you look more professional. You weren't going to be covered with frills and furbelows like a typical lady's day dress or tea dress. And the more business-like you were trying to be, generally you did go for a more severe suit. It was like a uniform.
Well, that would be the case if there were more women in the workforce at that time, and I don't know that there is. I will just describe it as this is the effect she's giving.
It was a very severe suit with glasses and hair pulled back, and she's
also
trying
a way of disguising herself.
Yeah, so so people don't instantly say, "Oh, Agatha Christie." And one of the things also that you have to think about, considering that this was set in 1926, is even in 1926. You had movies and you had magazines that printed pictures and you had newspapers that printed pictures. Most people still didn't know what someone who they didn't know looked like. You had to be really famous for people to recognize you only from a picture.
During Christie's disappearance, a newspaper published what they thought Agatha was disguised as, and she had several different. They took the same face and just put various things on them, and I think one of them was remarkably close to what she looked like in the movie, with her hair pulled back, and glasses especially, because glasses can disguise.
Yeah.
And she goes off and sets this up and doesn't realize that it wasn't until 2 days later, apparently, from seeing a newspaper that she had been reported as missing.
Apparently, she did have Carlo. It is mentioned that when Inspector Dix shows up, and another great name, that he is investigating her bona fides, what she is telling him, and he discovers it's Carlo Fisher, Agatha's secretary, and he knows he's being lied to, and he realizes it's Agatha Christie who is doing this, and there are some very pertinent things that Inspector Dix has to say to Agatha about how much this is costing the Crown, how much this is taking police away from everything else, that they're planning on dragging rivers, dragging the ocean
to find the ponds. The ponds in the area. To
find her body. That this is a huge waste of police resources and manpower. And by the way, did you know that your friend, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, is holding a seance using your golfing gloves to find out where you are?
You're right. That was a nice touch because that actually happened. They gave him a pair of Agatha's gloves, and he took it to a medium who predicted various things that actually kind of turned out to be true if you look at it in the right way. That discovery of Agatha's true identity occurs later in the movie, so you do have this suspenseful section in the middle after the first body is found and the police officer is on the scene that she has to make sure she can still investigate without being discovered.
Because first they get everybody to the house, and this was very clever too. Agatha and Nurse Mabel get all the suspects to the house under false pretenses, and the pretense is, of course, that they're going to inherit a lot of money, and people will throw all of their concerns aside if they think they have a chance at £186,000, and in $1926, add another zero. The luggage doesn't show up. And what you find out a little bit later, that the luggage showed up right on time, just like it was supposed to, and Nurse Mabel Rogers searched all the bags to find out what people brought. And of course, in a servant culture, you're not carrying your own suitcases, and if the luggage doesn't show up, it never even occurs to you that, of course, it showed up right on time when it was supposed to, and it was put off in the box room, and somebody searched the luggage. And then your luggage appears, and you never even know, especially because it will be Nurse Rogers disguised as a housemaid who unpacks for you. So you won't even know that your dainties have been rifled through.
So we have a variety of people here. We mentioned Wade and Daphne Miller, who was the father, who apparently is brutalizing his daughter, and the son and mother, Franklin and Pamela.
Rose is their last name.
There's Travis, who is this Cockney boxer
Travis
and
Pickford.
thief.
Yes.
Then there's Randolph, who was a cousin of Florence and knows Florence and dislikes her companion,
Mabel Rogers.
Mabel Rogers, who he doesn't recognize Mabel because they've never met.
They had never met. And there were a lot of little bits of cleverness in there where people wouldn't have met. Oh, and there was also Zaki Hanachi, who was Algerian or from Constantine, I think he said.
Constantine, which I'm not quite sure where that would be. It's not Constantinople, but he's obviously a foreigner. Definitely not French. But he has a French accent, though.
Yeah, so he has a little bit of a French accent. But these are all the people who could have murdered Florence on the train. And Agatha follows false clues. She interviews everyone, and she always uses the blind, like Poirot would, of this dangling lure of money. She dangles money in front of them, and that's all they can think about is £100,000? Really?
I have to put up with intrusive questions, and she disguises it as, these are the conditions of the will. So, you were charged with murder in 1920. And he has to answer. And again, it's this back and forth, this little psychological game. She was asking Travis about this, that he was actually investigated as the part of the Florence Nightingale Shore murder. But he said, no, I was never charged. And you can ask the police why. And he explains that there were some clues which they never released publicly that showed he couldn't have done it. This is a very well-constructed mystery.
You had two separate bodies, widely spaced. The first, of course, being Florence Nightingale Storm being murdered, being bludgeoned to death on the train. She didn't die right away either. It took her 4 days to die. When Agatha is investigating people, questioning them in the isolated country mansion, Wade Miller, who is a really nasty piece of work, gets shot and his body is thrown out a window. He tumbles out of a window. And there were clues to what was going on because, remember, they kept the luggage back to search it. And Mabel Rogers says Daphne Miller has enough makeup for an entire theater troupe. Well, there was a reason why she had all that makeup. It was to cover the bruises from the beatings that Daddy inflicted on her. And so you've got a body suddenly falling out the window, and now they have to call in the police. And this is when Detective Inspector Dixon, what a great name, he shows up, and with P.C. Spencer.
And he's upset about Christie's disappearance, and he tells them so. He doesn't recognize her at this point.
Yeah, he doesn't recognize her yet. And he is very angry not about necessarily the body, although it annoys the hell out of him, but the whole setup is skeevy. He knows the whole setup is skeevy. You can assume that because he's from the local area, this house has sat vacant for several years. So he knows something, even though this is not
Christmas. It was closed since Christmas.
It was closed since Christmas. And I think Mr. Todd, the gardener, said something about the family hadn't been back in 5 or 6 years. It had been closed for a long time. It takes a long time to get dust thick enough to write your name in.
But again, this is where the script really plays the interconnection between the disappearance and certain acts because he says, I would take you all down to the station right now, except I don't have enough officers because they're looking for this bloody mystery author, so you're going to have to stay here instead.
It ties in so beautifully. It really does. And of course, that ratchets up the pressure on Agatha, and it starts becoming real for her. When Wade Miller is shot, it suddenly becomes much more real. Once people get a taste for murder, they'll do it again.
But it also shows, and again, this is where I really love the way they set this script up, Agatha's not that good as a detective.
Yeah, because she makes mistakes, and she's trying to find her way, and it's harder than it looks.
Yeah, she leaps ahead of her conclusions because she assumed that Wade Miller was the one who was involved in the murder. And she says several times, well, we just have to find the evidence to confirm this.
And she's going on her intuition, and her intuition is wrong. Now, one thing that she does do that is correct is she does tell Mabel Rogers, who cannot believe that Daphne Miller had murdered Florence, that because Daphne looks so sweet and innocent, but Agatha is willing already to say, just because you look sweet and innocent doesn't mean that you're innocent.
And Mabel says, well, I'm not a suspect then either, am I? And she doesn't say anything.
Very nice touch. A very, very nice touch. Then Wade Miller gets murdered, proving to Agatha that she was wrong about her intuition, unless this is completely unrelated, except how could it be unrelated? And as it turns out, in the end, it was a murder that was unrelated to the murder that she was investigating.
Now, let me understand this then, because what was the motivation behind it?
Daphne had had enough beatings.
Now, but she really pull the trigger, because in the end, when there's see here, we get to the
That's what they're all saying.
Pamela.
That's what they're all saying, but I think Daphne shot him, because you see a scene where Daphne admits shooting him, and she says, I wish I'd shot that bastard earlier.
But in the end, they pin it on Pamela, the mother, I guess because they couldn't
prove that Pamela and Franklin murdered Florence on the train, but everybody could prove by lying that Franklin and Pamela murdered Wade Miller.
Because in the end, we have Agatha laying a trap for Franklin, getting him alone, getting him to confess, and of course, the police are listening in.
Which we've seen before in Agatha Christie short stories and novels.
Yeah. And he tries strangling her, and police rush in, pull him off, but you don't get that pat, all right, yes, I did it, and I wish I had killed him several times, but because the mother sits in and says, you have no proof. You have absolutely no proof apart from the police hearing him say, yes, I killed him. So I don't quite understand, how true
and of course, you could certainly arrest them for attempted murder as he's trying to strangle Agatha.
Kind of gloss that over. But the
real mastermind was Pamela. The real mastermind behind the crime was Pamela. And this cycles back again to Agatha telling Nurse Mabel Rogers that a woman could have done it. It could be someone like Daphne. And at all times, you look at Pamela Rose, who is an older woman, beautifully dressed, grieving for her lost son, and she has her other son with her, Franklin. You would never suspect she is the least likely suspect, but she is the one who actually did it because she wanted to punish Florence Nightingale Storm for saving the life of the German soldier who had murdered her son.
In wartime, but it didn't matter to her.
It didn't matter to her that people die in war on both sides and everybody grieves, and she was not special.
And when all this is happening at the climax and the other suspects come in, it's like they almost reach this collective decision of, we're going to lie to get her arrested. Because they all came up with little bits of information, including Daphne saying, I saw the gun fired from the hallway, and she or he was the one who fired it.
I'm not sure I can't remember now whether she said it was Franklin or Pamela firing the gun, but it's the group colludes to convict Franklin and Pamela of the murder of Wade Miller, even though Daphne did it. But as Daphne says, he always beat us. He beat me and my mother for as long as I can remember, and I wish I'd shot him before. She's afraid of him, and that's why she wears that's why she has all of the makeup, because she has to cover the bruises. And you see sometimes shadows of bruises on her face, especially around her eyes. When you see the body on the ground, Randolph mentions that he was getting dressed because he was barefoot, but he had a belt clutched. He was laying on a belt that was a coiled belt that he landed on, that he had been using on Daphne. So, yes, Daphne killed Wade. Daphne killed her father, but he had it coming.
The whole setup for the solution is kind of something that would never have appeared in an Agatha novel, but you wonder if it would have, because what she really loves is switching things up. She has the child do it. She has the child as the murderer. This person did it. Hidden couples do it. They all do it.
Or that one person did it and everyone else covers it up. That was the Hollow.
So who's to say that she wouldn't have thought if she had thought of this, she would have done it as well. It's very much in the Christie tradition, although not before Poirot. Poirot would have been furious about this. You can't lie to perjure yourself to send somebody to the gallows. That would be, he would not like that. Now, would Miss Marple approve?
I don't know. A lot of it would depend on how they felt for Daphne, and are you going to be able to convict the real criminals, who in this case is Pamela and Franklin. And what everyone says about Florence Nightingale Storm, the victim, is she was better than most people. She was the kind of woman who would take care of anyone who needed care. Nurse Rogers says specifically, talks about triage and how she could do the triage knowing that there were soldiers, there was nothing you could do to save them, and so you put your resources where it would matter. But Florence wanted to save them all, even when she couldn't. Florence had her waifs and strays. Florence wanted to help as many people as possible, to the point of harming her own self, to the point of taking care of German soldiers, even ones who were, oh my God, that man is a rabid dog and should be left to die. And Mabel Rogers says, I would have let him die. But Florence didn't, and because she didn't, Pamela Rose wanted to murder her because she saved that man who killed her own son in wartime.
And that's why they also made it so that she would live.
Suffer
for 4 days so that she would know why she was being killed this way.
Franklin was so angry over the death of his brother. He's no longer a minister anymore, which is a good thing because clearly he never took the word of the gospel seriously. But he tells Agatha while he's choking her that when he beat Florence Nightingale Storm, he didn't beat her to death. He cracked her skull, but he told her why he was doing it. And he continued beating her until he put her into a coma that she could not come out of, but he wanted her to know. He wanted her to hurt even more. He wanted to hurt mentally as well as physically.
It's hard to say that we enjoyed this after that last little bit, but
it was a really good movie, and it ended really well too. Agatha had to go back and face the storm. She's talking with Nurse Rogers. What are you going to say? And she says, well, Inspector Dix said I should keep it simple, so I'm going to claim amnesia. And I think it's Nurse Rogers who says, that sounds like a bad detective novel. Yes, I know, but it's simple and easy to remember.
Yeah.
Detective Inspector Dix had a lot to say about murder and playing games with murder, and he didn't like playing games with murderer or murderers.
He had a lot to say about obsession as well.
Oh, yes.
Roger's obsession with the case and Christie's
obsession with Archie.
With Archie as well. And I guess that ties into the end because when she's writing the manuscript, she finishes it and she looks at the title, The Truth of Murder, and she crosses it out, and it looks like she's doing Death on the Nile.
Which is a very obsessive novel.
Talk about obsessive, and it's also that was written much later than 1926 too. So.
Yeah, I was thinking it would be something like The Mystery of the Blue Train, which is the novel that she wrote after. Well, she wrote two novels immediately after the
Big Four.
The Big Four. She wrote two novels immediately after the disappearance. The Big Four was not really a novel. That was when Archie Christie's brother, her brother-in-law Campbell Christie, suggested that she stitch together 12 Poirot Hastings stories into a novel to fulfill her contract obligations, which she did, and he helped her by writing the interstitials to make it kind of work as a novel. But the novel that she actually wrote from whole cloth, a real novel instead of stitched together short stories, was Mystery of the Blue Train. And that's the one that she said proved to her that she was a professional writer because she didn't want to do it. She was under enormous stress and, her whole world had collapsed and she was having the whole world watch her because of the 11-day disappearance. And she still produced a very good mystery. And so I was kind of expecting to see The Mystery of the Blue Train or the, Murder on the Train or something like that, but that's not what they did.
But Death on the Nile is also involved with obsession as well. So it kind of fits. And again, you're not going to look at this for factual realism.
Even though it is far more realistic in every way than that Vanessa Redgrave biopic horror, it is far more realistic in every way.
It's weird in a way because we're so forgiving of this movie and so intolerant of that movie.
Because it was a bad movie. It was stupid. It was actively stupid.
It's the tone of the movie that sets your expectations. Meeting Arthur Conan Doyle and getting mystery advice from him is not serious. So you don't take the rest of the movie as serious. But the other one, you had Dustin Hoffman, Academy Award winner, Vanessa Redgrave, or was it?
It's Vanessa Redgrave.
Lynn was the sane one. Vanessa was a socialist who tried to organize the crew, and they're working class folks saying, "Can I get back to work? I get paid for this."
Yeah, I get paid for this. I'd like to get back to work so I can get paid.
And that was treated so seriously.
And then she turns into an electrical engineer overnight and sets up with the some of the spa equipment
to electrocute herself in the spa chair.
Yes, and there's loads of gratuitous female nudity. And remember, this is a health spa, which means it's going to be filled with old, saggy ladies needing spa treatment. And who does the camera linger on? 22-year-old naked women who wouldn't be at that spa in the first place. And there's Agatha on her knees packing Dustin Hoffman's shirts. She would never have done that. That is what maids do.
That was insulting.
It was insulting and gratuitously stupid.
Pretty much.
This was not.
But this wasn't. And the central core of the story held together. It was a very good mystery movie in the spirit of Agatha Christie.
Yes, very much so.
So we're looking forward to the next two, and we'll tell you about it next time.
Absolutely. So we had a fun time, and we can recommend Agatha and the Truth of Murder. It is worth seeking out. We enjoyed it.
We'll see you again next time. This is Bill Peschel for Agatha Christie She Watched.
And I'm Teresa, and remember, we do many events, and so look at our website, peschelpress.com, and you will always see what our upcoming events are. If you're in the area, come on out and talk to us about Agatha Christie.
We'll see you at the movies. Agatha Christie She Watched is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel. Produced by Bill Peschel. Theme song, Call to Adventure by Kevin MacLeod. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.